Hello and welcome to Mystical Tutor. These are a series of 5 to 15-minute classes designed to help improve your knowledge of the rules and policies of the Magic the Gathering Judge program. This lesson will cover the decisions a player makes while casting a spell. This includes announcing the spell, choosing modes, choosing targets, and distribution. Just like anything else, before you can pay for a spell, you need to know how much it costs. Sometimes this will just be the mana cost, exactly as it's printed on the card, but sometimes it's a bit more complicated. You'll always determine the total cost of a spell by applying any modifiers in the following order: add, subtract, trinisphere. The first part of finding the total cost of your spell is to see if anything is raising the cost. This may be caused by the static abilities of cards like Sphere of Resistance, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, or Jade Leech. Additional cost, like the kicker cost of Gatekeeper of Malakir, or the buyback cost of Capsize, will also raise the cost of a spell. The second part of finding the total cost of your spell is to check for any discounts. Again, there may be static effects lowering cost, like that of Jet Medallion or Edgewalker. The spell itself may also have a way to lower its cost, like Frogmite's Affinity for Artifacts. The important thing to note here is that you can't reduce the cost of a spell to less than 0. Finally, Trinisphere has its own little section of the totaling cost of your spell, and it's the last part to apply. When Trinisphere is on the battlefield and untapped, think of it as that person at the amusement park who checks your height before you get on the roller coaster. Trinisphere looks at the spell and says, "You must cost at least 3 mana to ride this ride." If the spell doesn't, you add generic mana to its mana cost until it equals 3. Some spells have alternative cost, like Force of Will or Fury of the Horde. Some have keyword abilities that are themselves alternative cost, like the Evoke cost of Muldrifter or the Bestow cost of Boon Satyr. Spells cast using alternative cost will follow the same rules: up, down, Trinisphere. Do you know what the total cost of your spell is now? Great! Don't change it, because after this, it's locked in. Let's look at a couple examples of this in action. You control Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, 2 plains, and an island. Your opponent has Thalia, Guardian of Thraben in play. Can you cast Narset Transcendent? Narset's mana cost is 2 colorless, a white, and a blue. First, we check whether anything will make that go up. Thalia says to add 1, so now Narset costs 3 colorless, a blue, and a white. Next, we check whether anything will make that go down. Grand Arbiter Augustin IV says that we can reduce it by 2, since Narset is both blue and white, now bringing the mana cost down to 1 colorless, a blue, and a white. The last part's pretty easy, since we have no Trinisphere in play, so it's going to look like your 2 plains and 1 island will be perfect to cast Narset Transcendent. You control Black Lotus. Can you cast Frogmite? Nothing is raising the cost to cast Frogmite, but its affinity for artifacts will see Black Lotus and lower the cost by 1. Now Frogmite's cost is locked in at 3, so by the time you sacrifice the Black Lotus to add mana to your pool, Affinity is no longer looking for it, and Frogmite's cost will still be 3. Knowing how much something costs doesn't help much if you don't have the resources to pay for it, so activating mana abilities will naturally be the next step in casting your spell. Lands aren't the only cards with mana abilities, so let's have a little crash course and see what that means. You can identify a mana ability because it produces mana, does not target, and is not a Planeswalker loyalty ability. Sorry, Xenagos. That being said, some mana abilities can move cards. Examples are Chromatic Sphere's Draw and the Parlay ability of Selvala Explorer Returned. Unless the ability specifically directs you to reveal the card, like Selvala, you won't be able to look at it until a player receives priority. That means the card you drew for Chromatic Sphere is going to have to wait in limbo for a minute. Now that we know where we can get the mana, we can go ahead and add it to our mana pool. Let's say you want to cast Tormenting Voice. You have 2 islands and a Chromatic Sphere, but no other cards than the Tormenting Voice in your hand. When told to activate mana abilities, you can activate the Chromatic Sphere to add red. You also draw a card, so when it comes time to pay your cost, you can. A lot of the time, paying the cost of your spell will just mean paying the mana that you added to your mana pool in the previous step, but there are some other possibilities. For example, Fling requires you to sacrifice a permanent, in this case, a creature. Tormenting Voice requires you to discard a card. And Deprive and Familiar's Ruse require you to return a permanent to your hand, a land and a creature respectively. The important thing is that costs can be paid in any order, as long as they're paid in full. As a matter of fact, sometimes changing the order that costs are paid can change the outcome of the spell. Here's an example of the order of payment mattering. You control Omnath, Locus of Mana, and you've added green, 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 green to your mana pool to pay the mana cost of Momentous Fall, which also requires that you sacrifice a creature. If you pay the mana cost first, Omnath will be a 1/1 when you sacrifice it, so you'll only draw 1 card and gain 1 life. However, if you pay the cost of sacrificing a creature first, the mana will still be in your pool, making Omnath a 5/5 when it dies. You can see why this would be more profitable for you. This concludes this lesson on paying to cast a spell. Join us next week when we discuss how to activate abilities. For additional lessons, visit Mystical Tutor online at mysticaltutor.org.